So today I'm going to be continuing with the How to Design series, and this week I'm going to be sharing with you my 4 steps that I use to ensure that the garden build meets the garden budget. And then I'm going to also continue on by talking a little bit about how we can cut costs if we need to without sacrificing quality. Okay, so if you're going to design a garden, you're going to need to know how much it's going to cost very roughly. Otherwise, when the quotes start coming in, it's not going to look good and it's probably not going to get built. And not only that, but as a garden designer, you're potentially going to lose credibility if you get it really wrong. To do this with any kind of accuracy, you're going to need to be able to have a strategy so that you can cost the garden as you go, ensuring that the price of the garden is considered at each stage of the garden design. Now, sometimes as you go along, these costs can increase. Perhaps the client wants to add something, or you think of something else that might want to sort of tag on to ensure that the garden is its absolute best. And you might get to the end of the design and suddenly realise that costs have spiralled a little bit. Well, towards the end of this video, I'm going to give you 4 ways in which you can cut those costs back and reduce things. So do stay tuned for that. I've been running Creative Roots, garden design and landscaping company now for around 14 years. But I know that at the concept stage especially, getting the budget right is really important. But how do we do this? Where do we start? Well, one of the first things that I do when I start out designing a garden is I take the client's brief. There's a video above, I think, if you need some help with the client brief. But I take that and I refine it down into key points of what the client wants.
So it might be a patio for dining outside, water feature, lighting, the list goes on. Or at least it does with a lot of my clients anyway.
And then I put figures next to each element.
Now this does require a little bit of experience, and you have to know how much a patio costs per square metre, but if you're doing this for the first time, a little bit of research online or a chat with a friendly landscaper or two can often give you some nominal figures.
Alternatively, if you are a designer, there are programs out there. Certainly I know that there's a couple within the UK where you can feed into the software the elements that you want to add within the garden, and they'll give you a general market rate so that you can get a rough idea of what this garden might consist of.
One we've come across as a program is called Garden Costs, and this is a simple way to estimate loosely what different elements might cost commercially.
So if you get this bit right at the early stages, it can really set you off on the right path when it comes to designing the garden. But it can also help in managing the client's expectations. I had a client not so long ago, they had a fairly good budget for their garden, but when we started looking at the brief and I started putting some nominal numbers next to each of the elements, it became clear that their expectations were a little bit higher than their budget. Now this wasn't a problem. I simply went through the brief, as I said, separating out the individual elements, putting numbers next to them, and showed them that really something had to give. Either we had to increase the budget or we had to compromise a little bit on their brief. Now, had I not done that, there was a risk that there would have been quite a bit of disappointment when it came to the concept stage, or even later on if I'd let it go, where either we would have had to compromise and they would have had to cut back on the design, which is never an easy sell when they've already seen what they could have had, or they would have had to spend more money, which isn't always an option. Now, quite a lot of the time, I tell my clients that I can usually get a concept within 10% of their budget if I know that their budget's reasonable in the first place. And after that, it's going to come down to them. Now, what I mean by that is it's going to very much depend on the choices that they make when it comes to potentially the specification. This is often because there are quite a lot of variables when it comes to the initial concept stage, and they can go either way.
So just as an example, this outdoor light on the left hand side costs just £30, yet a very similar looking fitting on the right hand side costs around £160. In a good sized garden there might be 10 to 15 of these, so you can see then that a variation of well over £1,000 just on light fittings, and that's before we get to the type of switching and other potential lights. So how do I manage this? Well, the only way really is through good communication. Some elements are easier than others. For example, we use the paving supplier sometimes, who has a showroom locally with all the choices laid out, pricing clear and simple. I can make 3 or 4 suggestions so that they get the feel for the colour and tone, and then if they see something else they like, they can see the variation in price it might make.
Now, other elements that are slightly harder to quantify in front of the client can be a bit tricky, certainly for instance like a planting budget. But what I found in the past that sometimes helps, if the client trusts me, is I can offer them perhaps a bronze, a silver or a gold, or maybe option 1, 2 or 3, where perhaps the bronze might mean that there's going to be smaller plants and a lot more gaps, whereas the gold, there's going to be a much more established planting scheme right from the beginning. So you have to be a little bit careful with the gold, that we manage our clients' expectations so they're not expecting the Chelsea flower show at the end of the process. Okay, well, no matter what the budget, whether it be high or low, we really have a duty to be efficient with what we're working with. And what I mean by that is the materials that we're going to be using within the project.
So as an example, I've got a deck within a garden that's 3 metres by 3 metres, so 9 square metres of decking. However, when I came to ordering the deck boards, they're 4 metres long. So we would either have 1 metre of wasted decking per board, 3 square metres wasted, or we have to cut the pieces and then put those within the deck, which not only requires more framework, but also more time to make it look good.
And it's easy to fall foul to this with everything, whether it be from paving to block work, even gravel, for instance, having half a bulk bag left over, which can sometimes not be cheap. So once I have a concept that I'm happy with and I know the client's happy with, it's at that point that I tend to then really start going into the detail when it comes to the materials. Checking out if the deck boards are 4 metres long and perhaps altering the deck to suit. When I design a set of steps, I'll probably, I might try to get both the tread and the riser out to the same slab so as to keep the cost down. Or if I'm designing a patio, to make sure I have multiples of that size within the paving. And by doing this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be saving the client money by removing the wastage and the potential need for contingencies of materials when it comes to the landscaper buying these materials in for the job. And this idea of reducing contingencies is my next point. One of the ways in which we as designers can earn our fees and certainly justify garden design fees. Design fees, by the way, is a video I'm going to be doing very, very soon. So if you're a garden designer and you want to think more about how you charge for the work you're doing, don't forget to subscribe because that's going to be coming very soon. But yeah, one of the ways in which we can really earn our keep is by reducing contingencies and therefore saving the client money. Let's consider a set of steps down from a terrace, for example.
When built correctly, these consist of a concrete float or foundation, concrete blocks or bricks, and then paving.
Now, if you don't have a design or some sort of construction detail for these steps, as a builder or as a landscape, you're going to have to work out the quantity of the materials you're going to need. You're going to need to know things like the height of the steps and also how you're going to finish them.
And then we need to consider what height to finish the concrete so it works with the brick coursing. After that, we've got to decide on details such as the nose, the size of the tread, as well as the rate of fall combined with the total height of all the steps to ensure it's even.
Now, don't get me wrong, these are all elements that a skilled landscaper can work out on site. But if I was a contractor and I was given a set of plans which didn't have the detailing on them, then I would have to allow a lot of head-scratching time on site. Well, actually, I wouldn't. What I would do is I would take the plans and I would then design those, and I would try and charge the client accordingly. But the risk is here, if we don't design everything as it needs to be, then any contractor's either going to stick a big contingency on there so that they can allow for that head scratching time on site, or they're going to have to spend the time themselves working things out, or even worse than that, sometimes they might plough in and the steps might end up looking awful. A well-designed garden should give any skilled landscaper all the information and details that they need so that they can provide you with a cost-effective solution to that design without high contingencies, thus meaning you're not paying a higher price than you really need to. So to recap, in order to design a garden to a budget, we need to follow these 4 key points.
We need to budget at the time of the brief. Not only does this manage expectations, but ensures you have the basic building blocks within your price range. Think carefully and spend time on the specification, looking at the other options and maybe thinking about bronze, silver or gold, all that way. Manage your use of materials carefully and design the garden with the available unit size in mind. And then design the details so your landscape doesn't have to, and avoid unnecessary costs and head scratching time.
Now let's say you've done all of those 4 key points as you've designed the garden, you come to the end and yet it's still just slightly over budget. Well, now I'm going to give you my 4 key ideas as to how I go about trying to cut that cost without sacrificing quality. So the first point and the first question that I ask is, can we deliver the same garden by just having a little bit more patience? An example of this might be the planting budget, for instance. Can we get away with using 1 or maybe 3 litre plants rather than 5 litre plants? We can space them accordingly, and in a few years' time, the garden's going to be nice and mature and probably not a whole lot different to had we spent another £1,000 getting some larger plants. Another option when it comes to patience, I have a couple of clients, I've done many gardens this way, where for instance they might get paid through bonuses, or they might have some more money coming in the future, and so they tend to suggest that the overall budget might be one thing, but actually they might just do part of the garden this year or part of the garden next year and do it in steps, so that again they get the final result and this great garden at the end of it, but rather than getting it all done all at once, we split it over a number of stages. So the second question that I might ask is, can we deliver the same garden but with slightly more cost-effective materials? A good example of this might be paving, for instance. A lot of porcelain paving is of a similar sort of quality, but some of them might be £10 a square metre more, for instance. We could potentially save ourselves, I don't know, £200, £300, £400, £500 maybe, by going for a very slightly more cost-effective material. And I think so long as we're careful that we don't reduce the quality, this can be a really great result. I've already shown you the example with the light fittings, for example. Both those light fittings had good warranties, well over a year. I think the first one was sort of 2 or 3 years, the other one was 7 years. We can keep the quality the same, but by simply just reducing perhaps the aesthetic side of things, or sometimes you can't even see the difference, that can reduce the budget quite significantly as well. So the third question I might ask is, can we deliver the same garden but just with a little bit less? This one can be slightly trickier if you've already come to the end of the garden, you've already got a design, but still worthwhile looking at. Example of this might be the client has asked for a dining space with a table and 6 chairs. So we've placed perhaps a patio on there that might measure 6 metres by 6 metres. Can we get the same garden, or can we reduce that patio very slightly and create the same space that's still just as effective, maybe by creating a patio that's only 5 metres by 4 metres? Already we've reduced the patio there by 16 square metres, quite a significant reduction. If the going rate might be £200 a square metre for that. So by saving yourself £3,200 just by doing this, can make a massive impact to the garden. Now, if we do that in multiple places, then we may well be able to pull that design right back to the original budget that was needed, and still have the functionality that we wanted. Clearly there's a balance here, and it's not necessarily a case of simply reducing it by that full amount. We've obviously got to replace that reduction in the patio. That might be through planting, but that might end up being half the cost. Or we could do gravel. It might be that the lawn could be extended. These are all ways in which we can cut that budget back. It might be that you've got 5 archways leading to the garden room. Could we reduce that then to 4 archways? Would the client even have known the difference? You know, if they haven't seen the final design, would they know that you'd originally put 5 in? 4 can be just as effective potentially and save quite a bit of money. And finally, point number 4. Can we deliver the same garden but perhaps in a more efficient way? And what I might mean by a more efficient way is looking at the type of building that we're doing within the garden. I recently was instructed to design a garden where the back doors to the house were around 1.6 metres higher than the final level of the lawn. Started off by designing this beautiful terrace. It was fully paved, lots of walls that sort of feature walls with planting in front of them. But it was quite a little bit higher than the budget, or at least what the client wanted to spend. So I looked at this again, and in order to create that terrace, there was around about 10 cubic metres of concrete. There was sort of several lorry loads of hardcore MOT type 1. And I thought, and obviously a lot of that incorporated in the labour costs. Now, by changing some of the terrace to hardwood decking, we removed the need for a lot of the concrete, which we removed a lot of barrowing time for the labourers, reduced the amount, took away almost half of the hardcore, Timber framing is also obviously a lot more lightweight and easier to build, quicker to bring around. And so by doing so, we ended up managing to reduce the budget. I think it was by about £10,000. So all of a sudden that project's able to proceed, and the client's really happy. And actually, the combination of hardwood timber and some of the paved terraces that we've kept within that looks really good. Now, hopefully, by following those first 4 steps in which you budget while you're designing the garden, and then having those 4 backups when it comes to reducing the cost if need be, you're going to be able to design a garden that's going to fit your budget. And no project then needs to be shelved ever again. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that useful. If you did, please do give us a like, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Keep the comments and questions coming, loving those, and looking forward to creating the next video for you next week. Hopefully see you all very soon. Take care.